about that case. And the reason he might have had that on his mind this week is because of Bowe Bergdahl, right? Bowe Bergdahl walked off base in Afghanistan in 2009. He was picked up within hours by the Taliban, held by them mostly in cages for 5 years. He was freed in 2014. The army charged him with desertion and misbehavior before the enemy, which is a strange sounding phrase, but it's a very serious charge, comes with a possible life sentence. Bowe Bergdahl pled guilty. He didn't fight the charges. But when it came to sentencing him, it was President Trump who did all he could as president to make sure that Bowe Bergdahl would get as light a sentence as possible. Right? It was a standard feature of Trump's stump speech during the campaign to denounce Bowe Bergdahl as a traitor. He would even act out the physical act of executing him, to call for Bergdahl to not just be executed, but to be executed in specific ways. He'd say to the crowd, you know, Bergdahl ought to be thrown out of an airplane without a parachute. He'd mime shooting him in the head. The president said all that stuff during the campaign about Bergdahl, and that arguably itself might have had a prejudicial outcome on Bergdahl's legal proceedings, Trump speaking as a presidential candidate. But then once Trump was president, and he was asked about Bowe Bergdahl, he couldn't resist. He told reporters that he wanted to remind them of what he'd said about Bergdahl during the campaign. And bingo, just like that, the president personally ensured that some measure of lenience would be shown to Bowe Bergdahl during his sentencing, specifically because of President Trump and his inability to not talk about this case. And in fact, the judge in the Bowe Bergdahl case gave notice earlier this week that the president's inability to stop himself from continuing to talk about Bowe Bergdahl, that would be seen as prejudicial to Bergdahl's ability to be treated appropriately and fairly within the justice system. It would be seen as, quote, mitigating evidence in deciding Bergdahl's sentence. And Bowe Bergdahl was sentenced today. He was sentenced to a loss in rank, a fine, dishonorable discharge, but no prison time. Prosecutors had asked for 14 years. He got no prison time. And upon that sentence being handed down today, in consideration of the mitigating evidence of the president trying to weigh in on how Bergdahl should be treated, once that sentence got handed down today, the president did it again. He put out a public response as president, as commander-in-chief, to the Bergdahl sentencing, calling it a complete and total disgrace to our country and our military. And I hope that felt great to the president to get that off his chest. But you know what? The practical effect of him getting that off his chest is that Bergdahl's lawyers will now use that in their appeal. And their appeal is going forward. And because everybody in the military has to answer to the commander-in-chief, and the commander-in-chief has now expressed his personal displeasure with the lenience of the initial sentence in this case, that means, in practical terms, that further legal proceedings against Bowe Bergdahl will also have to mitigate against the impact of the president's comments today. They will have to adjust the way they treat Bergdahl in court to account for the fact that the military justice system will now be inherently biased against him because of those words expressed on Twitter today by the commander-in-chief.